I'm 25, and for as long as I can remember, my birthdays have been treated like an afterthought in my family. It's almost a running joke among my friends, but to me, it's just depressing. Growing up with two siblings who always had their birthdays celebrated like national holidays, I've had a front row seat to the favoritism. Every year, it was the same pattern. My brother, who's 2 years older, and my sister, who's 3 years younger, always got the works. Balloons, custom cakes, themed parties, and gifts that made you jealous even if you weren't into whatever they got. Meanwhile, I'd get a last-minute, "Oh, let's grab a cake from the grocery store" if I was lucky. And if I wasn't, they'd forget entirely. The first time I realized something was off was on my 8th birthday. That year, I had been looking forward to a small party because my brother had just had this epic week-long celebration for his 10th. He got a superhero-themed extravaganza with party favors, costumes, and a magician. I didn't expect something on that scale, but I thought at least there'd be a cake. When the day came, nothing. No cake, no balloons, no mention of it being my birthday. I sat through dinner waiting for someone to say something, but instead, my parents talked about my brother's recent soccer game. When I finally asked if they forgot, my mom brushed it off, saying they'd been busy and would make it up to me next year. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Every year after that was a repeat of the same excuses. "We're so busy, birthdays aren't that important. We'll celebrate next weekend." Somehow, next weekend never came. By the time I was in high school, I stopped expecting anything. I'd save up what little money I had and buy myself something small, a book, a video game, whatever I was into. I told myself I didn't care, but deep down, it stung. My siblings, of course, didn't have this problem. My sister had a sweet 16 that looked straight out of a movie, a live band, a custom dress, even a professional photographer. My parents didn't blink at the cost. Meanwhile, I got a text for my 16th birthday that said, "Happy birthday, we love you." And that was it. My friends threw me a small surprise party that year because they noticed my parents weren't going to do anything. It was one of the best birthdays I'd had, but it also made the contrast in my family's treatment painfully clear. Over the years, I tried to fix things. I'd remind my parents weeks in advance, or even suggest small plans like going out for dinner. Sometimes they'd agree, but the plans would inevitably fall apart because something more important came up. My brother's promotion, my sister's college acceptance, a family friend's anniversary. My birthday was always at the bottom of the priority list. At some point, I just gave up. This year, though, I decided I'd had enough. No more being overlooked, no more excuses. I wanted to make a statement they couldn't ignore. I've been working as a graphic designer for a few years now, and I've saved up a decent amount. I figured, why not use some of that money to do something for myself? If they weren't going to celebrate me, I'd celebrate myself. And I'd make it big enough that they'd have no choice but to notice. I started brainstorming. What would make the biggest impact? A new car? A designer watch? None of it felt right. Then it hit me. A luxury family trip. Something so extravagant that it would be impossible to dismiss. I'd plan the whole thing, pay for it up front, and then present it as a gift to myself. The twist? I'd frame it as a gift for the whole family, but in a way that made it clear this was about reclaiming my birthdays. I ran the idea by my close friends, who were immediately on board. They'd seen how my family treated me over the years and thought it was about time I stood up for myself. One of them even suggested filming the reveal, just to capture my parents' reactions. I wasn't sure about that, but I liked the idea of making it a memorable moment. Over the next few weeks, I started planting seeds. I casually mentioned to a few relatives that I had something special planned for my birthday. My parents, as usual, didn't seem to notice. The family group chat was full of my sister's latest vacation photos and my brother's work updates, not a single mention of my birthday. It was almost funny at this point. With the plans finalized and the big day approaching, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. This wasn't just about the trip, it was about making a point. For once, my birthday wouldn't be ignored. I'd make sure of it. As the day got closer, I started dropping hints on social media, teasing a huge announcement. My friends played along, adding to the hype. My family, predictably, remained oblivious. This year, everything was going to change. I wasn't just celebrating my birthday. I was taking back years of neglect and turning them into something unforgettable. With my birthday around the corner, I started paying closer attention to how my family acted. I wasn't surprised when there wasn't a single mention of it. No texts, no plans, nothing. It was like any other week for them. The family group chat was buzzing, though. Not about me, of course. My brother was talking about his promotion party. Turns out, he'd scheduled it for the same week as my birthday. Typical. Everyone in the chat was hyping him up, congratulating him, and asking about the party details. My birthday? Not even a footnote. At this point, I was all in on my plan. I'd already secured the centerpiece, a luxury cruise package for the family. It wasn't just any cruise either. This was top tier: balconies, gourmet dining, private excursions. It cost me a chunk of my savings, but I didn't care. This wasn't just a birthday gift for myself. This was my way of saying, you can't ignore me anymore. Once the booking was done, I started working on the reveal. I wanted it to be a moment no one would forget. I reserved a small venue, set up catering, and even put together a video presentation about the trip. My friends thought the whole thing was brilliant. They'd been cheering me on since I told them the plan. A few of them even offered to help with the setup, which I gladly accepted. Next, I sent out invitations. I made it clear this wasn't a regular birthday party. It was a special celebration. I invited some extended family members who'd always been kind to me, but left out my parents and siblings. Not because I didn't want them to come, but because I wanted them to find out about it later. I knew that would get under their skin. The social media teasers came next. I posted vague updates, big announcement coming soon, and can't wait to share this with everyone. My friends chimed in with comments, building the hype even more. Meanwhile, my siblings started getting nosy. My sister asked if I had any plans for my birthday, which I played off casually. My brother, too busy with his promotion party, didn't seem to notice or care. The day before my birthday, my parents called. It wasn't about me, though. They were asking if I could bring something to my brother's party. While we were on the phone, I casually asked if they'd made any plans for my birthday. They paused, clearly caught off guard, and mumbled something about how we could probably grab dinner if there's time. I thanked them for letting me handle the day and hung up smiling. They had no idea what was coming. That evening, I finalized everything for the reveal. The cruise package details were ready, the video presentation looked perfect, and the venue was set. A few doubts started creeping in. Was this too much? Would it backfire? But every time I second-guessed myself, I thought about all those birthdays I'd spent alone, waiting for someone to care. My friends reassured me I was doing the right thing. They reminded me this wasn't just about the cruise, it was about standing up for myself. To add a little more flair, I posted a countdown timer on social media that night. Less than 24 hours to go. The comments flooded in with friends, and a few curious relatives asking what it was about. I didn't respond, letting the suspense build. I went to bed knowing that tomorrow was going to be a game changer. The stage was set. My family didn't know it yet, but this birthday was going to be one they'd never forget. The morning of my birthday, I woke up to exactly what I expected. Silence. No texts, no calls, nothing from my family. My friends, on the other hand, didn't miss a beat. Messages started pouring in right after midnight. Some sent jokes about how this was finally my year, while others hyped me up about the party. It was a good start to the day. After grabbing a quick breakfast, I headed to the venue to set up for the big reveal. My friends were already there, helping to arrange the decorations and check the presentation setup. The space looked amazing, simple but classy, with a backdrop that made it perfect for photos. The video presentation was loaded onto a screen at the front, ready to go. A table at the side displayed small party favors I'd prepared for the guests. Everything was on point. By the time the first guests started arriving, the atmosphere was buzzing. My aunts, uncles, and a few cousins showed up, all curious about what this special celebration was about. They mingled, exchanged guesses, and asked me what was going on. but I kept them in suspense. The vibe was light and fun, and it felt great to be surrounded by people who actually cared. Around mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed with the first sign of life from my parents. It was a simple, generic, happy birthday text. No punctuation, no effort. I replied with a polite, "Thank you," and that was the end of it. My siblings, meanwhile, were busy posting on social media. My brother shared photos from his promotion party planning, and my sister uploaded selfies from some outing. Neither mentioned my birthday at all. As the venue filled up, it was time for the main event. I stood at the front, looking out at the crowd of extended family and friends. I started with a short speech, thanking everyone for coming and sharing a bit about why I'd organized the event. I didn't hold back. I talked about how birthdays had always been a sore spot for me, how I'd often felt overlooked, and how this year I wanted to change that. The room was quiet as I spoke, and I could see some relatives nodding along, clearly understanding where I was coming from. Then came the big moment. I hit play on the video presentation, which began with photos from past birthdays, empty tables, grocery store cakes, and other reminders of the lackluster celebrations I'd endured. The video transitioned into a reveal of the luxury family cruise I'd booked. Pictures of the ship, the destinations, and the activities flashed across the screen, ending with a message that read, "Happy birthday to me. This is how I celebrate." The room erupted in applause. Some of my relatives looked genuinely impressed, while others exchanged whispers clearly caught off guard. A few came up to hug me, saying how proud they were of me for doing something so bold. My friends who had been in on the plan were grinning from ear to ear. Not everyone was thrilled, though. I noticed my parents and siblings had started seeing the social media posts from the party. Within minutes, my mom had commented on one of the photos, saying something about how proud she was of me. It felt awkward and forced, like she was trying to save face. My siblings stayed quiet online, but later texted me separately. My sister called the whole thing a bit much, while my brother sarcastically congratulated me on making a scene. The extended family wasn't holding back, though. Several of them pulled me aside to share their thoughts on my parents' behavior. Some even shared their own stories of feeling ignored or underappreciated by them over the years. It was eye-opening, but also a little sad. I realized I wasn't the only one who had dealt with this dynamic. As the party wound down, I spent some time with my friends who toasted to the success of the event. They'd been my biggest supporters through all of this, and I couldn't have pulled it off without them. One of them jokingly suggested that I make the cruise an annual thing, but we all knew this wasn't just about the trip. It was about finally being seen and heard. By the end of the night, my phone was blowing up with notifications. The photos and videos from the party were gaining traction, with comments from friends, family, and even a few coworkers who'd caught wind of it. My parents and siblings, however, were noticeably absent from the online chatter. When I finally got home, I sat down and scrolled through the posts again. There was a mix of reactions: support, surprise, and a bit of jealousy. But one thing was clear. I'd made my point. For the first time in years, my birthday wasn't just a forgotten date on the calendar. It was a day to remember. The morning after the party, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. My family group chat, which had been silent about my birthday for days, was suddenly alive with activity. My parents and siblings had clearly seen the photos and videos from the event, and they were not happy. The first message came from my mom. She demanded a family meeting to discuss the cruise, calling it unfair that such a big decision was made without consulting everyone. My dad chimed in soon after, saying that the trip should have been a collective family effort. My siblings didn't hold back either. My brother accused me of intentionally leaving them out to make them look bad, while my sister said the whole thing was over the top and unnecessary. I read through the messages but didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sent a screenshot of the family group chat from a week ago, the one where everyone had been discussing my brother's promotion party while ignoring my birthday. I added a caption. I gave everyone a chance to plan something, but no one bothered. This is what I did for myself. That didn't go over well. My brother doubled down, saying I was blowing things out of proportion and trying to make him the villain. My sister called me attention-seeking and accused me of excluding them on purpose. My parents tried to shift the narrative, saying I had misunderstood their intentions over the years. My mom even threw in a classic excuse, claiming they had always been busy and never meant to hurt me. Meanwhile, my extended family was reaching out privately. A few aunts and cousins messaged me to say how much they loved the event and to share their own stories of being overlooked by my parents in different situations. It was reassuring to know I wasn't imagining things, but it also made me realize just how deep these patterns ran. Social media wasn't helping my parents' case either. The event photos had gained traction, with friends, coworkers, and mutuals commenting on how creative and bold the gesture was. Some of my coworkers even mentioned it at work, saying they admired the way I turned a negative situation into something positive. My parents, on the other hand, were clearly feeling the heat. Their social circle had caught wind of the drama, and they weren't handling it well. Later that afternoon, I got a text from my mom. It was a half-hearted apology, blaming busy schedules for the years of neglect and saying they'd always meant to do better. She suggested we split the cruise so the whole family could attend, framing it as a way to heal from this situation. I replied that the booking was non-refundable and non-transferable, which was true. That didn't stop her from pressing the issue, though. My siblings weren't any better. They teamed up to confront me, accusing me of ruining future birthdays for everyone by making this year all about me. I stayed calm and explained that this wasn't about them. It was about taking control of my own birthday after years of being ignored. That only seemed to make them angrier. In contrast, my friends were nothing but supportive. They reminded me that I didn't owe anyone an apology and encouraged me to keep setting boundaries. One of them joked that my parents' sudden interest in family meetings was proof that the party had hit a nerve. As the day went on, I noticed my parents getting more desperate. They started calling, leaving voicemails about how this cruise could have been a bonding experience for the whole family if only I had included them in the planning. I didn't answer. I knew where this was headed. They wanted to guilt me into changing the narrative. By the evening, my dad sent a message saying they wanted to have a face-to-face meeting to clear the air. I knew this was their way of trying to regain control of the situation, but I agreed to meet. I figured it was better to address everything head-on rather than letting it drag out. Before responding, I made it clear to myself, this meeting wasn't going to be about appeasing anyone. It was about laying everything on the table. As I wrapped up the day, I realized something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't looking for validation from my family. The success of the party, the support from my friends, and even the fallout had shown me that I could stand up for myself and create my own happiness. Whatever happened next, I wasn't going back to being the forgotten middle child. The family meeting was set for the following Saturday at a neutral location, a small cafe that we'd all been to before. I brought one of my close friends along for support. They stayed in the background but within earshot, just in case things got out of hand. My parents and siblings arrived together, looking tense. It was clear from the start that this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. As soon as we sat down, my mom launched into it. She accused me of trying to divide the family, claiming that my party and the cruise reveal had humiliated them in front of the extended family. She said it was unfair to exclude them from the planning and that my actions had made them look like bad parents. My dad, sitting quietly beside her, nodded occasionally but didn't add much. I stayed calm and let her finish before responding. I explained that the event wasn't about humiliating anyone. It was about celebrating myself after years of being overlooked. I reminded them of all the birthdays they'd forgotten or brushed aside and pulled out screenshots of past family group chats where my birthday wasn't even mentioned. I pointed out the stark contrast between how my siblings' milestones were celebrated and how mine were ignored. My siblings didn't take kindly to that. My brother interrupted, saying he hadn't noticed any favoritism and accusing me of making a big deal out of nothing. My sister chimed in, calling me dramatic and saying that if I had a problem, I should have spoken up sooner. I wasn't about to let them rewrite history. I calmly explained how I'd tried over the years, dropping hints, making suggestions, even planning things myself, only to be dismissed every time. I also mentioned how other family members had noticed the same pattern. That seemed to catch my parents off guard. They exchanged a look, clearly flustered when I brought up the messages of support I'd received from aunts, uncles, and cousins. My mom's tone shifted. She started crying, saying she'd done her best and hadn't realized I felt so unloved. She claimed that juggling work, family, and other responsibilities had made it hard to give everyone equal attention. While she cried, my dad stayed silent, looking uncomfortable. I acknowledged her feelings but didn't back down. I told her that while I understood life could get busy, it didn't excuse years of neglect. I made it clear that my actions weren't meant to hurt anyone. They were meant to address a problem that had been ignored for too long. When I pressed my dad, asking why he'd never stepped in, he admitted they could have done more. He said he'd always assumed my mom had things under control and didn't realize how much it had affected me. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest thing I'd ever gotten from him. Then the blame game started. My parents turned on each other, arguing about who was responsible for planning family events. My mom accused my dad of being uninvolved, while my dad countered that she insisted on handling birthdays herself. My siblings looked visibly uncomfortable as the argument escalated. I took the opportunity to point out how neither of them had ever noticed or cared that my birthday was consistently overlooked. My siblings didn't advocate for fairness either. My brother and sister had happily accepted the spotlight every year without once questioning why I didn't get the same treatment. That seemed to hit a nerve. My sister shifted in her seat, avoiding eye contact, while my brother crossed his arms defensively. At that point, I decided to lay down some boundaries. I told them that moving forward, I wouldn't tolerate being ignored or dismissed anymore. If they wanted to be part of my life, they needed to make an effort, not just on my birthday, but in general. I also made it clear that any future plans involving me would have to be genuine, not performative. My parents reluctantly agreed to try harder, but their tone made it clear they were more concerned about damage control than actually fixing the underlying issues. To my surprise, my sister softened a bit. She admitted she hadn't realized how hurtful the dynamic was and offered a hesitant apology. It wasn't much, but it was something. The meeting ended on a tense note. There was no grand resolution, no group hug, or heartfelt reconciliation. We walked out of the cafe divided, each of us clearly processing things in our own way. My parents and siblings left together, still talking quietly among themselves. My friend and I stayed back for a while, decompressing and talking through what had just happened. As I walked home later that evening, I felt a strange mix of empowerment and resignation. I'd said my piece and stood my ground, but I also knew some relationships might never fully heal. For the first time, though, I felt okay with that. I wasn't looking for their validation anymore. Whatever came next, I was ready. After the tense meeting, I decided to step back from my family for a while. I didn't block anyone or make a dramatic announcement, but I stopped responding to non-essential messages. I needed space to process everything and figure out how to move forward. In the meantime, my extended family kept reaching out. A few relatives called to check in, and others sent encouraging texts, reaffirming that they understood where I was coming from. Their support meant a lot. It felt like someone in my family finally saw me. A few days later, my sister surprised me with a follow-up message. She apologized again, this time more sincerely. She admitted that she hadn't thought much about how our family dynamic affected me until the meeting. She even said she'd noticed how my birthdays were often overlooked, but didn't realize how hurtful it must have been. It was the first time I felt like she genuinely understood. We exchanged a few more messages, and while it didn't erase years of frustration, it was a step in the right direction. My parents, on the other hand, were all over the place. One day, my mom would send a long, heartfelt text about how she wanted to rebuild our relationship. The next day, she'd send a passive-aggressive message about how the cruise could have been a great family bonding experience if only I'd included them. My dad mostly stayed quiet, but when he did reach out, it was usually to echo my mom's sentiments. Their inconsistency made it hard to trust their intentions, so I kept my responses polite but brief. During this time, I started therapy. I hadn't realized just how much growing up in that environment had affected me until everything came to a head. Therapy helped me unpack the years of emotional neglect and develop healthier ways to set boundaries. It was tough work, but it felt good to take control of my own narrative. Then came the cruise. I invited a small group of close friends to join me, and we set off on what turned out to be an incredible trip. The ship was as luxurious as I'd hoped, and we spent the days exploring beautiful destinations, eating amazing food, and just enjoying ourselves. I posted a few updates on social media. Nothing over the top, just pictures of the scenery and the group having fun. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People commented on how happy I looked and praised me for taking time to celebrate myself. It was a stark contrast to the guilt-tripping I'd been getting from my parents. Speaking of my parents, they weren't thrilled about the posts. My mom left a passive-aggressive comment on one picture about how it would have been nice to share this experience as a family. She deleted it later, but not before a few relatives saw it and called her out. My dad stayed quiet as usual, but I heard through the grapevine that they were both upset about being left out. Interestingly, my sister started to come around. She told me she'd been talking to my parents, trying to help them see things from my perspective. She also admitted that she'd been thinking about how our family prioritized her and my brother's milestones while sidelining mine. It was the most self-awareness I'd seen from any of my siblings, and it gave me a bit of hope that things could improve. As the holidays approached, my parents invited me to a family gathering. They promised it would be special and hinted that they wanted to make amends. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but after some thought, I decided to go. I made it clear that I would leave if my boundaries weren't respected. When I arrived, I could tell they were trying. My mom had set up a small table with a belated birthday gift, a thoughtful gesture that I hadn't expected. My dad greeted me warmly, and even my brother was less standoffish than usual. The evening wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, but it was a step in the right direction. The biggest surprise came when my sister spoke up during dinner. She brought up how the family had overlooked my birthday in the past and how unfair it was. She didn't sugarcoat it or make excuses. She just acknowledged the problem and encouraged everyone to do better. My parents looked a little uncomfortable but nodded in agreement. It wasn't a full resolution, but it felt like progress. As the night wound down, I realized that while things weren't completely fixed, they were moving in a better direction. My parents seemed to genuinely want to try, even if their efforts still felt a bit clumsy. My sister's newfound perspective gave me hope that at least one relationship in my family might improve significantly. Looking back, the cruise wasn't just about reclaiming my birthday. It was a turning point. It forced my family to confront years of neglect and made me realize that I didn't need their validation to feel worthy. Moving forward, I'm committed to prioritizing myself and surrounding myself with people who genuinely care. Whether my family becomes part of that circle remains to be seen, but for now, I'm at peace with where things stand. Story 2. I'm a 27-year-old man who accomplished something a few months ago that I had been aiming for years. I purchased the automobile of my dreams. It was brand new and mine, but it wasn't some incredibly costly sports vehicle or anything. To make it happen, I've been working 2 jobs, saving every dime I can, and forgoing holidays. It seemed like all of my hard work had finally paid off as I drove it off the lot. Now, my 24-year-old cousin Eric has always been a wild card. He is one of such individuals. That's just Eric is one of the justifications used by every member of the family. He's the person that always arrives late, takes stuff without permission, and sees every circumstance as a chance to play a practical joke. I knew he didn't take much seriously, so I always avoided him, but I never imagined he would go so far as he did. All of this began at my parents' house during a family gathering. Every summer they throw a large party, and this year was no different. Everyone, including Eric, turned up. I made the decision to show my family my new vehicle, making sure it was out of the way but still close enough for me to monitor it. I parked it on the driveway. Eric ran straight for the automobile as soon as he noticed it. whistling and making jokes about how I must have finally won the lottery. He strolled by it. When he responded, "Let me take it for a spin," I could clearly see where this was headed. "I'll make sure it survives." I dismissed it with a laugh and gently but firmly told him no. I told them that I didn't allow anyone drive the automobile since it meant so much to me, not even my closest pals. He shrugged and rolled his eyes, but his expression shouted at me. I embraced the challenge. Eric continued to bring it up throughout the course of the following several hours. He made fun of me for being unfunny and too protective. I should loosen up and let Eric drive it, some of the elder family said at one time. However, I refused to back down and reiterated that the automobile was not allowed. No matter how much mockery I received, I was not going to back down on this. We all sat down to dinner later that night. I relaxed for a while during the spirited talk. I had left my jacket hanging at the entrance, and my keys were in the pocket. I didn't give it any thought until Eric vanished. For a while, I heard a faint motor revving outside while dessert was being served. I felt sick to my stomach. Just as my car was pulling out of the driveway with Eric driving, I sprung to my feet and hurried to the window. I ran outside and shouted for him, but he had already left. In an attempt to reassure me, my uncle said Eric was just having some fun and would return shortly. The ease with which everyone was handling it astounded me. Even though I was furious, all I could do was wait. After an hour or so, Eric returned. Before I saw him, I heard him. There was a loud scratching noise, then laughing. My heart fell when he pulled into the driveway. My car's front end was shattered. There were significant scrapes along the side, one of the headlights was broken, and the bumper was falling off. With a smile on his face as if he had just executed the greatest practical joke ever, Eric strolled outside. "Calm down, dude. It's just a car," he remarked, tossing the keys to me. "I take it you have insurance?" At first, I couldn't even reply. As I tried to comprehend what had occurred, I simply gazed at the wreckage. He shrugged and said he was simply playing around when I eventually got around to asking him what in the world he was thinking. The family's response was divided. A few of them were appalled and concurred that Eric had overreached himself. His parents were among those that minimized the entire situation. They insisted that I should overlook it, because it was an accident. Meanwhile, Eric pretended it didn't matter. I received a repair quote the next morning, and it wasn't good. Repairing the damage would have cost hundreds of dollars. Eric smiled and said, "That's what insurance is for," when I informed him he had to pay for it. I knew then that he would not accept responsibility. I offered him one more opportunity to put things right, but he dismissed me, claiming that I was exaggerating the situation. When he began making fun of me on social media by sharing photos of my car with comments like, "Oops, my bad," and laughing emojis, things became much worse. It was the last straw. I blogged about the problem online and spoke with a few pals, and everyone gave me advice. It was time for me to go to court. I hesitated at first. Eric left me with no other option, even though I knew that suing him would cause a huge gap in the family. I thus got in touch with a lawyer and began the procedure. I'm going to show Eric how serious I am, even if he believed I was bluffing. One update. I lost little time in choosing to sue Eric. I called a lawyer right away and told them everything that had transpired. We gathered all the required paperwork and began the lawsuit filing procedure. Damages of almost $8,000 were estimated for repairs alone. In addition, I had to cope with the inconvenience of missing work and paying legal expenses. News of the lawsuit quickly circulated among the family members. My parents supported me when I said that Eric needed to learn a lesson, but they were parents, so that was a different matter. They said I was tearing the family apart over a car and accused me of being cold-hearted. They even accused me of being selfish and said that since I had insurance, which incidentally did not cover the damage because Eric took the car without my consent, I should overlook it. Naturally, Eric pretended that it was all a big joke. He assured everyone that the lawsuit was a bluff and that he would never follow through on it. He made matters worse by making fun of the situation in a sarcastic video that he shared on social media. He recorded himself approaching a toy car, acting as though he was going to smash it into a wall, and then laughing uncontrollably. I guess I'm being sued now because of the caption. While some of our mutual friends found it amusing, others sent me messages claiming that Eric was acting inappropriately. Nevertheless, the entire experience made me even more resolved to finish this. When the final repair estimate from the mechanic arrived, it was worse than I had anticipated. The suspension and frame had sustained severe damage in the collision, rendering the vehicle unsafe to drive until it was repaired. The sum exceeded $12,000. It wasn't merely a dent or a scratch. That was a serious financial hit. Balancing all of this with my job wasn't easy. I was burning through my savings and working overtime just to keep up with the legal fees. At one point, Eric's lawyer reached out with an offer. Eric was willing to pay $1,000 to settle the case if I agreed to drop the lawsuit. I didn't even have to think about it. I rejected it immediately. That amount wouldn't even cover a fraction of the repairs, let alone the other expenses. The family drama escalated when some extended relatives decided to step in and mediate. They organized a meeting at my aunt's house, and everyone involved was invited. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I went anyway, hoping for a resolution. Eric showed up late as usual and acted like the whole thing was a joke. While people were trying to have a serious discussion, he kept making snide remarks and cracking jokes. At one point, he even said, "It's not like I killed anyone." The lack of remorse was infuriating, and it became clear that this meeting wasn't going anywhere. After that, I focused on gathering as much evidence as possible for the case. One big break came when I remembered the parking lot where Eric had crashed. My car had surveillance cameras. I contacted the property owner and managed to get the footage. The video showed Eric speeding into the lot, attempting to drift and losing control before slamming into the lamppost. It was all there, clear as day. I also decided to share my story online, not for sympathy, but for advice. The reaction was tremendous. Thousands of people commented, offering legal tips and words of encouragement. Some even recounted similar tales about coping with entitled family members. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. A week later, Eric received the formal court paperwork. That's when it finally hit him that I wasn't bluffing. His mood altered, at least for a minute. He contacted me, asking if we could work something out, but when I informed him the only answer was for him to pay for the damages in full. He hung up on me. The familial conflicts were taking their toll. Some relatives stopped talking to me entirely, while others attempted to stay neutral, stating they didn't want to take sides. Eric's parents doubled down, calling me every insult in the book. It seemed solitary at times, but my close friends were a big source of support. They reminded me why I was doing this, to hold Eric accountable for his acts. One unexpected twist happened when Eric's younger sister reached out to me personally. She apologized for everything and claimed she'd seen this type of behavior from Eric her whole life. She even volunteered to testify on my behalf, stating she was tired of his getting away with everything. Eric became enraged upon learning of this and accused her of treachery. His response simply exacerbated the situation, demonstrating his true immaturity. I worked with my lawyer to finish our case as the court date drew near. We had copies of Eric's social media posts, the security footage, the repair estimates, and now a willing witness. Everything was prepared. The countdown to court had started, and although I was anxious, I was also adamant that Eric had avoided penalties all of his life. He wasn't going to get away with it this time, though. Update 2. As the court date drew nearer, things began to move quickly. In order to ensure that we were ready, my lawyer immediately got to work constructing the case. A comprehensive dossier had the security footage, repair estimates, and Eric's own humorous social media tweets about the event. The focal point was the parking lot footage. It displayed the precise moment of Eric's collision, as well as his careless driving. It was indisputable evidence. Eric's younger sister, the relative who had volunteered to testify, provided a thorough testimony. She didn't mince words. Her description of Eric's lengthy history of reckless behavior, and how the family had always dismissed it, provided a vivid image of a man who had never been held responsible for his deeds. Eric, meantime, at last engaged a lawyer. They first tried the identical strategy Eric had employed, presenting a lowball offer. At $2,500 this time, it was somewhat more than the $12,000 in damages, but it was still absurd. Without a second's hesitation, my lawyer rejected it. Eric's parents intensified their attempts to turn the family against me at this time. They contacted almost everyone to accuse me of being selfish and causing the family to fall apart over a few automobile scrapes. They said I was exaggerating everything, and they framed Eric as the victim. Others remained impartial or subtly backed me, but some family members fell for it and began to put pressure on me to withdraw the case. Then came the anonymous messages. I started getting emails and texts from unidentified numbers accusing me of destroying family ties, calling me greedy, and even advising me to ignore it for the sake of harmony. It was clear from the wording and time that these had something to do with Eric or his parents. In the midst of all this confusion, I received an unexpected message from a distant cousin. She informed me about Eric's parents' refusal to accept responsibility for the damage he caused to her property years ago. The narrative was uncannily similar, although it wasn't an automobile. She told me that Eric had to take responsibility this time and urged me to keep going. Between the ongoing family problems and my lawyer's sessions, work became yet another source of stress. My concentration began to waver. Upon noticing, my manager drew me aside to inquire about my well-being. To my surprise, he was understanding when I gave him a quick explanation of the circumstances. He reassured me that my work was still good in spite of everything, and advised me to look after myself. The insurance company rejected my claim since Eric stole the automobile without my consent, just when I thought things couldn't get much more confusing. They refused to pay for the damages, therefore I was forced to pay for the repairs up front, increasing the financial burden even more. But Eric was not feeling the strain. He didn't act that way anyhow. He made the decision to perform in front of everyone at a family birthday celebration. He referred to me as a sellout and said that I prioritized money before family. Most folks merely looked uneasy, although a few made awkward laughs. I didn't answer. There was no argument with me. And to be honest, his actions just served to confirm my original motivation. Additionally, the internet aspect of things was becoming more popular. As word of my tale spread, many local news organizations even contacted me to inquire if I would be interested in doing an interview. I said no. This has nothing to do with PR. Making Eric accept responsibility prior to the trial was the goal. The attorneys met one final time in an attempt to reach a settlement. It was evident that Eric and his parents, who were present, still didn't take this seriously. As his lawyer made yet another feeble offer, Eric smirked and reclined back in his chair. Eric's attitude remained unchanged when my lawyer presented the proof, which included the security film. He had no interest in putting things right and would not apologize. There was no consensus at the end of the meeting. Eric's parents chose to make everything worse on top of everything else. They began threatening a countersuit, saying they were emotionally distressed by the action. The threat was meaningless. Although my attorney reassured me that there was no foundation for it, it was just another instance of the lengths they were prepared to go to in order to deny that Eric was at fault. The online community was a source of strength in spite of all the turmoil. Others related similar experiences, gave me advice, and even proposed launching a campaign to help pay for my legal bills. Although I was grateful for the offer, I didn't want to entangle others financially or turn this into a public spectacle. The day of the court hearing finally came. I got up early, went to the courts, and went over everything with my lawyer one final time. Although I felt I had done everything I could to prepare, it was nevertheless nerve-wracking to enter that place. Eric, however, walked in as if it were any other day. Even though he was still grinning, I could see a glimmer of doubt in his eyes. Finally, the case was about to start, and I was prepared to see it through to the end. I knew that I had done my bit to hold Eric responsible, regardless of what transpired next. The third update. The courtroom was smaller than I had anticipated, but the anxiety was palpable in every seat. My lawyer and I sat on one side, the case paperwork neatly laid out on the desk. While his lawyer shuffled documents across the room, Eric smirked and relaxed in his chair. His parents were immediately behind him, muttering now and again, their expressions a mixture of self-righteous witness and irritation. The proceedings started as soon as the judge arrived. In their opening argument, Eric's attorneys described the entire episode as an innocent joke gone bad. He highlighted Eric's age, describing him as a young guy who erred and didn't deserve to suffer financial devastation as a result. They claimed that I was the one who was being unreasonable by taking this to court when it was our chance to settle it amicably. My attorney wasted no time. He outlined the events leading up to the collision and its aftermath, starting with Eric stealing my keys without my consent. He described the damage's financial impact, the estimated cost of repairs, and the psychological toll of handling the consequences. The repercussions of Eric's careless behavior were clearly illustrated by the tone, which was composed but strong. Then the security camera footage appeared. As the video began to play, the courtroom became quiet. It shows Eric trying to drift and losing control as he slammed into the light post after accelerating into the lot. When the video concluded, the impact was so loud that viewers in the gallery flinched. For the first time, Eric's smile faded as he moved in his chair. Witness testimony came next. The cousin who had pledged to back me, Eric's younger sister, stood up. She discussed Eric's past irresponsible actions, including earlier instances in which he damaged property while evading accountability. She gave a straightforward and consistent statement that demonstrated a history of entitlement and immaturity. She also detailed his actions following the collision, emphasizing his total lack of regret when Eric testified. Things began to go apart. He made an effort to appear calm, saying he didn't intend to hurt anyone and that he didn't think the automobile would be harmed. However, he faltered as he was being cross-examined. Eric said his social media posts were jokes and unrelated to the incident when my lawyer questioned him about them. At that point, my attorney produced screenshots of the posts in which Eric made fun of the circumstance and even acknowledged stealing the automobile. Eric stumbled as he tried to explain himself, and the atmosphere was tense. He was obviously dishonest based on his evasive responses and discrepancies. Next were Eric's parents. They attempted to place the responsibility on me by claiming that the lawsuit was an overreaction and that I ought to have been more understanding. However, their arguments lacked foundation and were just emotional. They portrayed Eric as the victim, but it was clear that they were desperate. After hearing the testimony and the proof, the judge didn't hold back. He spoke directly to Eric, criticizing his dismissive demeanor and lack of responsibility during the case. His voice was severe, and the judge's comments caused Eric's self-assured manner to falter. Closing remarks were made by both attorneys. "This was just a prank that went too far," Eric's attorney reiterated. However, my attorney stressed the effect on me financially, as well as the need to hold Eric responsible. After concluding the arguments, the judge declared a brief break before rendering the decision. The 20 minutes seemed to drag on forever. I sat silently and gazed at the door of the courtroom. When the judge came back, Eric avoided making eye contact with anyone, and his parents screamed angrily behind him. The decision was unambiguous. He decided in my favor, directing Eric to reimburse me for the whole $12,000 cost of the repairs, as well as further damages for the psychological suffering his acts had caused. The sum was substantial, but considering everything I had been through, it seemed appropriate. It wasn't warmly received by Eric. Suddenly, he got up and hurried out of the courtroom while muttering to himself. Everyone in the room flinched when the massive oak door banged behind him. His parents glared at me as they walked away. Following the decision, a few relatives who had been there discreetly approached to express their support. Some even acknowledged that they were proud of me for refusing to back down, but they spoke quietly since they obviously didn't want to start any more trouble. Others walked away silently. Their features were etched with disgust. I had mixed feelings when I left the courtroom. Both the weight of the family divide this had caused and the relief of victory were present. I was aware of how far this had gone, and I understood that if those connections were ever to be repaired, it would take time. I had accomplished my goal for the time being, but it was obvious that I needed to have the automobile fixed and begin the financial reconstruction process. Even though the impact from Eric's actions was unpleasant, It seemed like a step in the right direction toward responsibility. I couldn't help but think back on everything that had happened up to this point as I drove away from the courthouse. Even if the path ahead would not be simple, I was at least making progress at last. Even if the lawsuit was won, it wasn't finished. Eric was told to pay, but he didn't, as was to be expected. There was no trace of the money for weeks. The following stage, garnishing his salary, was described by my lawyer. It was the sole method to enforce the court's ruling, but it was a laborious procedure that involved more paperwork and delays. Meanwhile, I was able to have my automobile fixed at last. It was a minor triumph to see it repaired. The money wasn't the only factor. It was about getting back what Eric had stolen with his careless behavior. It felt good to pick up the automobile from the mechanic. However, the financial impact was still apparent. Despite the court's decision, conversely, common friends began to put pressure on Eric. Some of them openly criticized him for his actions and demanded that he accept responsibility. Eventually, this resulted in a social media post. He made a pathetic apology, saying he didn't plan to generate drama and that he was sorry if anyone was offended. He was obviously not truly sorry. All he was doing was trying. The family became more divided in an effort to placate the mounting criticism. Some family members started to avoid my parents' family gatherings, saying the litigation had destroyed the family. Others made an effort to be impartial and steer clear of the topic entirely. My parents sensed the burden of the heated Eric meetings. Nevertheless, they supported me despite the fact that it meant severing ties with some of my relatives. During this time, an older family member unexpectedly reached out. They felt obliged to speak out, even though they seldom ever participated in family conflicts. They reminded me that standing up for what's right frequently presents difficulties and offered some guidance on handling the drama. Although unexpected, their help was greatly appreciated. After a while, Eric's wages were garnished, and I started getting the money he was due. Even if the payment wasn't made all at once, it seemed like progress. I began to recover my finances gradually. My money had been impacted by the legal bills, but I was committed to getting better. Eric's reputation plummeted as the consequences persisted. He lost a lot of friends and family members as a result of his actions during and after the case. Even some of his closest pals began to distance themselves, and invitations to functions became uncommon. Some just severed their connections with him, stating that they could not stand by someone who would not accept accountability for their deeds. I learned through rumors that Eric's actions were beginning to interfere with his work. It was said that his lack of responsibility and immaturity were creating problems with his colleagues. It demonstrated how his activities were catching up to him in every area of his life, even if I didn't find any joy in that. A few months later, the strain was evident during a family gathering. Eric appeared, but stayed completely away from me. He seldom spoke to anyone outside of his own family and remained on the other side of the room. But anytime his parents thought I wasn't looking, they made it a point to glare at me. I stood my ground, even if it was awkward. I wasn't there to stir things up. The rest of my family supported me, and I was there for them. Following that incident, I established certain limits. I made it clear that anyone who wished to harbor resentment would not be allowed to treat me disrespectfully or in an enabling manner. They had made that decision, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. The online community that had been there for me during the struggle kept encouraging me. A lot of individuals stressed the need of taking care of oneself and making great progress in the future. Their advice enabled me to get back on track and rebuild my life and connections with those who meant most. Meanwhile, Eric's parents continued to harbor resentment. They kept accusing me of causing the family's discord, but their claims were beginning to seem implausible. As Eric's behavior stayed the same, more and more family members started to see through their efforts to defend him. In spite of everything, I took some time to consider what had transpired and my progress. Although the litigation and the family turmoil had a huge emotional toll, I learned the importance of advocating for myself. I had avoided fighting for years in an effort to maintain harmony, but this event made me realize that occasionally accountability is necessary for peace. The family learned a lesson from Eric's behavior. He hasn't, in my opinion, completely learnt his lesson. It's evident that his decisions are still having an impact. His previously easygoing demeanor now appears more like avoidance than confidence, and his social circle has narrowed. Moving forward is the main goal for me. In order to absorb all that happened, I've taken up new hobbies, gotten back in touch with encouraging friends, and even gone into therapy. Although this phase of my life has been difficult, it has also marked a sea change. It wasn't easy, but I had to stand up for myself. In retrospect, I wouldn't alter a thing. The lesson was worthwhile despite all the unforeseen outcomes. I'll keep that one with me for a very long time. Update. 5 months following the court case, Eric's last payment was received, formally settling the obligation. Finally, this ordeal's financial chapter was concluded. There was a sense of relief, and knowing that it was all over, but it took some time to realize how long it had all gone on. I observed a minor change in the family dynamic at this period. Some of the family who had drifted away began to reconnect. Small gestures, remarks on social media postings, and informal messages inquiring about my well-being were the first things that happened. Eventually, though, a few of them expressed a desire to get back in touch. They acknowledged that they regretted the way things had turned out and that they had been compelled to choose a side by Eric's parents. At family gatherings, Eric, on the other hand, was different. Although he didn't express regret directly, his typically boisterous and arrogant demeanor was notably restrained. He avoided conflict and even had courteous conversations with other family members, but he stayed to himself. It was very different from the person who used to laugh off the harm he did. Additionally, it was something with the full payments and some additional work-related savings, even if it didn't seem like full accountability. I made the decision that a new beginning was necessary. In addition to restoring my automobile, I traded it in for a newer model that seemed like a sign of progress. Reclaiming my hard work and reminding myself of the things I'd learned was what driving it felt like. The entire family adapted to the new normal. Now there were boundaries, ones I had established and upheld. Probably as a result of everything that transpired with Eric, relatives who previously excused poor behavior began to call it out more. His behavior and the resulting litigation served as a warning, something that was brought up in conversations about justice and responsibility. The most important ties become stronger. Throughout it all, my parents were there for me, and I tried to strengthen my relationship with the family members who had supported me. My life became even more centered on friends who had always supported me, telling me that it wasn't about my birth family. It was about who was present when it mattered. Eventually, Eric's parents, who had been the most vocal opponents of me, changed their minds. Although they didn't express regret directly, the animosity subsided. They tried to have a civil talk during a family get-together, but they were obviously not prepared to accept their part in things. Nevertheless, the lack of stress was a minor improvement. I thanked the community for their support and shared the resolution in a final update that I put online. I discussed the lessons I had learned, stressing the need of sticking to your principles even when it seems like the deck is stacked against you. The reaction was tremendous. People shared similar experiences and praised the bravery required to see it through in the thousands of comments that flooded in. The family learned a larger lesson from Eric's actions and the repercussions. His long-protected, boys will be boys mindset started to wane as people began to take responsibilities more seriously. Though he never explicitly stated it, even Eric appeared to be considering his actions. Personally, I was aware that more needed to be done. I began therapy because I couldn't ignore the emotional toll that the litigation and family conflict were taking on me. It served as a means of processing everything and concentrating on the future without harboring resentment. The sessions reassured me that advocating for myself was not about seeking retribution and helped me find peace. It has to do with self-respect and fairness. Eric unexpectedly contacted me personally a few months later. It was only a straightforward statement admitting his mistake. It wasn't a big show. It was a positive step that he didn't try to defend or explain his behavior. I took his remarks for what they were, even if I wasn't prepared to mend our relationship completely. An indication that he may be maturing at last. I even had the opportunity to tutor a younger relative who was beginning to exhibit some of Eric's dangerous behaviors as a result of the experience. We discussed accountability and repercussions, and I used the tale to illustrate why it's critical to consider the impact of your actions on other people. It was satisfying to transform a challenging situation into a lesson that may benefit others. I couldn't help but think about how far I'd come as I drove my new automobile around the streets of my neighborhood, which I knew well. In addition to being dirty, unpleasant, and often lonely, the road had taught me more about who I am than I could have ever imagined. Even though it wasn't the route I would have taken, I'm proud of how I handled it. And this chapter of my life is now officially ended. I defended myself, made someone answerable, and emerged stronger as a result. It's time to concentrate on the future now. I'm prepared for whatever happens next, and the path is clear. Story 3. I'm a 26-year-old man who inherited my grandparents' home a few months ago. It's ideal, but it's not a mansion or anything. A charming small house with lots of personality. It had been cared for by my grandparents for decades, and they had accumulated a lot of emotional objects, antique furniture, and vintage trinkets. It's the type of location where you immediately feel at home. Generally speaking, my family is rather close. However, we do have our moments, particularly with my Aunt Linda. She has 3 children, ages 7, 9, and 12, and is 45. Linda has always been the kind of person who believes she is the center of the universe. Although she occasionally has good intentions, her parenting style essentially consists of letting her children do as they like. Family get-togethers frequently devolve into mayhem due to her children damaging things, climbing furniture, or spilling beverages. She usually dismisses it with a giggle and claims that they are simply acting like children. Everyone else is left to clean up the mess in the meanwhile. Linda gave me an unexpected call a few weeks ago. She stated that she wanted a location to spend the weekend with her children while her house underwent some renovations. I hesitated because, to be honest, I felt sick to my stomach at the thought of those children roaming rampant in my grandparents' house. However, Linda persisted. She assured them it would only be for 2 nights and that the children would be watched. I consented against my better judgment. I made care to establish certain ground rules before they came. I made it clear to Linda that some rooms, like the attic in my grandparents' former study, were off limits. I also made it plain that the children were not allowed to handle any priceless or delicate objects. They will behave well when they arrived on Friday night, Linda told me, waving it off as if it were no great problem. My front door felt like it was struck by a tornado. Before Linda had even gotten her bags out of the car, the children exploded inside, yelling and running in all directions. I reminded everyone of the rules while attempting to remain composed. Linda, who was already browsing through her phone, nodded absently. In the first hour, I saw the middle child attempting to climb a bookshelf and the youngest child jumping on my couch. Linda simply laughed and said, "Oh, don't mind them," when I told them to stop. They're simply thrilled. I didn't want to start a fight, so I ignored my uneasy feeling. I was in the kitchen later that evening when I heard a loud whoop coming from the living room. When I hurried in, I discovered a vintage rug my grandparents had brought back from a trip abroad covered in juice. Trying not to show how frustrated I was, I picked up some towels and began blotting the stain. Linda muttered something about children being messy while hardly taking her eyes off her phone. The night wasn't quite over, but I was tired by the time I went to bed. I heard whispers and footsteps coming from upstairs at around midnight. The 3 children were in the attic, surrounded by boxes of mementos and old photo albums, when I followed the noise. They had gotten into the attic despite the fact that it was supposed to be locked. They shrugged and said they were examining Linda's response when I asked what they were doing. They're curious. It's good for them to learn about family history. The next morning, the damage became even more apparent. A voice that had been on the dining room table was in pieces on the floor. There were scratches all over the dining table itself, and several kitchen appliances had been pulled out and left scattered across the counters. I confronted Linda about it, but she just rolled her eyes and said, "It's just stuff. You can replace it." Things hit a breaking point on Saturday afternoon. I had to run to the store to grab a few things, And when I came back, I found the kids in the backyard. They'd gotten into my shed, pulled out some tools, and were using them to build something in the process. They managed to break a section of my fence and shatter a window on the patio door. I was livid when I demanded that Linda take responsibility. She turned it around on me. She said I should have kid-proofed the house if I didn't want anything broken. She accused me of being too uptight and making her feel unwelcome. Instead of staying for the rest of the weekend, she announced they were leaving early. She packed up her kids, and by the time they drove off, I was left standing in my backyard, surrounded by the mess they had made. Now I'm stuck trying to figure out how to handle this. The house is more than just a building to me. It's a piece of my family's history. Seeing it degraded like way is upsetting. But I don't know how to make Linda comprehend that. I've never been the confrontational kind, but I don't believe I can simply let this go. Update 1. The next morning, I walked through the home to survey the damage. I'd already seen the damaged fence and smashed patio glass, but as I proceeded into each room, the entire amount of the destruction became obvious. The old carpeting in the main room was damaged beyond repair. My grandparents' dining table had significant scrapes across the top, and one of the dining chairs was missing a piece of the backrest in the kitchen. Several small appliances had been knocked down, and a cupboard door hung loosely on its hinges. When I got it to the study, I froze the old clock that had been on the mantel for decades. A clock my grandparents adored was lying on the floor, smashed. Its exquisite glass face was fractured, and the hands were distorted at unusual angles. It felt like a hit to the gut. That clock wasn't merely an heirloom. It was one of the last concrete links I had to them. I documented the damage by taking pictures of everything. Later that day, I sent Linda a text. I told her what I had discovered and requested that she pay for the repairs. She responded very instantly, "Children are children," followed by a series of laughing emojis. "What are you anticipating?" She dismissed it all as if it were nothing, made no apology, and made no attempt to pay for anything. My parents attempted to mediate the situation when I informed them what had transpired. For the interest of family unity, they advised me to let it go. My dad reminded me that Linda was a single mother who was already dealing with a lot of stress and offered that items may be replaced. My mother advised me that I needed to get over my harsh behavior. I should have known better than to let Linda and her children stay in the house in the first place, some other relatives said. People were obviously taking sides, but I wasn't going to overlook this. To gather quotes for repairing the dining table, the patio window, and the fence, I contacted a few repair businesses. It totaled little more than $3,000. I sent Linda the estimates in the hopes that it would encourage her to accept accountability. Rather, she launched an attack. She accused me of being anti-family and inflating the damage to make herself seem terrible in a lengthy Facebook tirade that she posted within hours. She portrayed herself as a victim, saying that at my house, she and her children were treated like criminals. I began receiving texts from family members, some of whom supported Linda. Others said they didn't want to get involved yet quietly supported me. Then, suddenly, Linda's niece, one of my cousins, contacted me. She informed me that Linda had previously done a similar stunt. It seems that Linda has a habit of allowing her children to damage other people's property and then avoiding accountability. I felt a little less alone in handling this when my cousin even offered a few anecdotes from her personal experiences. I was advised to consult a lawyer by a friend. I initially felt that it was excessive, but after giving it some more thinking, I realized that it was the only way to hold Linda responsible. After setting up a consultation, I began compiling all of my available evidence. I had Linda's communications and pictures of the damage repair estimates. Linda, meantime, was not finished. With a hint of sarcasm, she texted me again. "You've been overly sensitive all along. Adult up." She seemed to be challenging me to go farther, as if she believed I wouldn't really confront her. I made the decision to post an update on Reddit detailing all that had transpired. The reaction was tremendous. I received thousands of comments from others who had similar experiences and encouraged me to file a lawsuit. Others urged severing all contact with Linda, while others proposed small claims court. My parents proposed a family gathering to settle the situation since they were concerned about how things were becoming worse. They persuaded me that leaving would be preferable to letting things continue on, even if I didn't want to. It was a fiasco from the beginning when the day finally arrived. When Linda brought her children, they went crazy right away, disregarding everyone's efforts to manage them. Linda said throughout the conversation that I had set her up for failure by allowing her to remain in a home that was unsuitable for children. She made it plain that she would not cover the costs of the losses and declined to accept responsibility for anything. I was about to believe that things couldn't get much worse until my uncle Linda's brother intervened. To put an end to the drama, he promised to pay for a portion of the expenses. I was grateful for the gesture, but it felt unfair to hold him responsible for Linda's actions. Nevertheless, it was the first time a family member had publicly admitted Linda's guilt. That encounter confirmed my conclusion that allowing Linda to get away with it would simply serve to strengthen her sense of entitlement. I couldn't allow her get away with this without suffering some repercussions. I informed my parents and uncle that although I valued their attempts at mediation, I had already made the decision to take legal action. The money was no longer the only consideration. It was about defending my rights and preserving my grandparents' heritage. If you would want any changes or more information included to the update, please let me know. Update 2. I proceeded to file a small claims lawsuit against Linda following the disastrous family gathering. I didn't make this decision lightly, but I knew it was the only course of action given all that had transpired: the harm, the deflection, the posts on social media. The procedure for filing was simple. I turned in the proof. I had saved records of our text conversations, repair quotes, and pictures of the damaged things. 3 weeks later, the court date was scheduled. Linda blew out when she learned. Messages appeared on my phone, each one more angry than the last. She accused me of betraying the family and labeled me a traitor. She even said that I was attempting to ruin her life because I was angry. Then, as if to frighten me, Linda threatened to cut me out of her life completely, in classic Linda way. The legal action did not sit well with my parents either. They begged me over the phone to make sure I wanted to go through on this. My mother would not stop talking about how difficult this was for the family and how my grandparents would have been so sad to witness our arguments. My father attempted to persuade me to quit the case, arguing that the irreversible harm to our relationships was not worth it. I listened, but my opinion remained unchanged. I spent the following 3 days getting ready for court. I created a chronology of events and printed out all the pictures, including the ones of the destroyed fence and the broken clock. I pointed out the contemptuous texts Linda had given me and attached the repair estimates. I also received support from my cousins. I obtained statements from other family members who had previously dealt with Linda's claim with the assistance of the person who had contacted me before. Their accounts clearly depicted a person who never accepted accountability for her deeds. Reddit, meanwhile, was a lifesaver. After my post's update, the reaction was tremendous. Individuals gave guidance, related my experience, and even connected me with resources about minor claims. Court. Some folks gave me advice on how to make my case in private messaging. The encouragement gave me greater confidence to stand my ground and was like a tidal wave. Despite stepping up her efforts to portray herself as the victim, Linda wasn't sitting around doing nothing. She started posting on Facebook more often, with each message getting more theatrical. She accused me of being cold-hearted and that I was attempting to ruin her. She also suggested that I was acting in this way because I detested her children. Her crowd was obviously split. While some commenters defended her, others began criticizing her and demanding the whole truth. Then came the guilt trip. I received a gift in the mail one evening. 3 handwritten notes, one from each of Linda's children, were found inside. As I read them, it became clear that they were coached, even if at first I believed they may be real. Although I was accused for making their mom's life more difficult, the letters expressed regret for the inconvenience. I declined to respond, even though it was a low blow. Linda's attorney contacted her with a settlement offer as the court date drew near. If I agreed to dismiss the lawsuit, she would cover a tiny portion of the repair costs. I declined it because it didn't even come close to paying for the damages. The money was no longer the only consideration. It has to do with responsibility. The trial day arrived in a flash. Playing the role of an unjustly persecuted single mother, Linda arrived in full theatrical gear. She disputed everything, saying that I was simply suing her out of spite and that the damage wasn't as severe as I had claimed. But as soon as I gave my proof, her tale broke down. The court wasn't pleased by Linda's justifications because the pictures and repair estimates were self-evident. Her attempt to assign blame failed to withstand the timetable I had painstakingly established. The judge ultimately decided in my favor. In addition to court costs, Linda was mandated to pay the entire sum of damages. The aftermath was as chaotic as I had anticipated, but it was a big relief. My relatives congratulated me over the phone, saying it was time for someone to confront Linda. I was called selfish and callous by others. The family's division was more pronounced than before. That night, I posted an update on Reddit to let everyone who had been following the story know how it turned out. It was an amazing response. People poured their support via the comments, ecstatic to see justice done. Some even referred to it as a win for everyone who has to cope with entitled relatives. As expected, Linda was not pleased with the decision. She began circulating false information about me to everyone who would listen and blocked me on all platforms. I choose to disregard it all. I had given up on attempting to reason with her or mend our relationship. I felt like I was finally at peace for the first time in weeks. I had done all in my power to defend myself and preserve the legacy my grandparents had bequeathed. I was prepared to proceed no matter what, without the drama of Linda looming above me. Update 3. Linda was compelled to pay the entire damages and court expenses following the court verdict, but things didn't exactly go as planned. There was no indication of payment for weeks. I wasn't surprised when Linda said she was having financial difficulties. She consistently avoided taking responsibility for her actions. I considered taking action, such as garnishing her pay, but I didn't want to make matters worse too soon. I made the decision to wait and see whether she would comply on her own for the time being. The family did not overlook the delay. As the gap grew wider, tensions increased. Some relatives publicly backed me, stating that Linda should be held responsible for her deeds. Others said I ruined the family dynamic by overreacting. My mother once called to express her hope that I would simply leave everything behind and go on. Similar thoughts were expressed by my dad, who tried to persuade me that the ongoing turmoil wasn't worth it, in the midst of everything. The brother of my uncle Linda filled in once again. In an attempt to reason with her, he reached out to her and urged her to make the payment in order to save herself more humiliation. I didn't know precisely how that discussion unfolded, but I received a partial payment from Linda shortly after. It was sufficient to demonstrate that she was at least accepting the decision, even if it was not nearly half of what she owed. Seldom, then unexpectedly, I received a telegram from a distant relative. They informed me that Linda had recently purchased a brand new television and arranged for her and the children to go on vacation. This was the same individual who was avoiding payment by claiming financial difficulties. I wasn't shocked, but I was stunned. My cousin provided me several screenshots, which I saved in case I needed them later. Linda, meantime, was continuing her shenanigans on social media. She continued to publish ambiguous status updates regarding family disappointment and betrayal. Although I wasn't specifically mentioned in the posts, everyone understood who they were about. Some of our common acquaintances shook their heads at the absurdity of it all and emailed me screenshots. She was obviously trying to play the victim as much as possible. My friends and cousins provided a strong support network during this entire ordeal. To lift my spirits, some of them planned a little gathering one weekend. They reminded me that I wasn't the only one in this predicament, as we spent the evening remembering family get-togethers. At the moment, when I was beginning to feel the strain of the situation at home, it was just what I needed. I discovered that I was spending more time fixing some of my grandparents' broken possessions. It took weeks to fix the heirloom clock, but it seemed like a minor success when I was able to hang it back on the wall. I reflected about my grandparents and the principles they taught our family while I worked. It was difficult to avoid feeling torn about how they might react to the drama that was still going on. I received a letter in the mail one morning. It came from Linda's 12-year-old eldest kid. It was a shockingly honest and genuine letter. They expressed regret for their actions throughout the visit and claimed to have realized the damage they had created. Unlike the other letters Linda had previously sent, this one seemed real. I chose to cherish the gift as a reminder that not everyone in this circumstance was without hope. The subsequent family get-together was, to put it mildly, uncomfortable. Linda completely shunned me, but her children appeared sincere in their regrets. They helped clean the table after supper and avoided problems. Compared to the mayhem they had wreaked at my place, it was a sharp contrast. Update 4. Life finally began to calm down as the wage garnishment procedure got underway. However, Linda had not yet complied completely with the court's decision. I found some closure in the constant flow of little payments that came in through the garnishment. Nevertheless, the psychological impact of everything persisted. They had to cope with the family drama, the ongoing hostility at parties, and the uncomfortable talks with family members. I made the decision to begin treatment. It wasn't until I started speaking with a professional that I discovered how much stress I was carrying. They assisted me in overcoming my irritation with Linda's entitled conduct and the shame I felt from family criticism. I gradually learned to let go of the things that were beyond my control. Then an unforeseen event occurred. The 12-year-old daughter of Linda, who had sent me the touching letter, contacted me once more. This time, they volunteered to assist fix the fence and other damaged areas of my house. Although I was taken aback, I was grateful for the gesture. I agreed because it seemed real. We worked side by side on a bright Saturday, fixing cracked boards and hammering nails. Even if it wasn't flawless, the barrier was intact at the end of the day. It seemed like a tiny step forward at the time. A ray of optimism that perhaps not everything in this circumstance was irreparable came from witnessing the effort made by someone so young. Naturally, Linda was upset when she learned about the fence repair. She began making up additional tales about how I was inciting the family against her and accused me of using her children as leverage. I didn't even try to answer. I had made the decision to set firm limits by this time. I informed Linda that until she paid for the damages in full, she was no longer welcome in my house. It has nothing to do with pettiness. It was about safeguarding both my heritage and my grandparents' legacy. Another round of turmoil ensued during the subsequent family get-together. During dinner, Linda, who was obviously still furious, tried to embarrass me in public. She continued talking about how I had made her feel like an outsider and treated her unfairly. However, she did not receive the expected backing this time. Her lengthy history of entitled conduct was brought up by other family members. She was even reminded by one of my uncles of other instances in which she had denied responsibility for comparable circumstances. I wasn't defending myself, for once. For me, others were doing it. I started dating someone new around this time. They were considerate, encouraging, and gave me a more positive outlook on life. With their assistance, they urged me to let go of the poisonous connections and concentrate on the ones that were important. If Linda kept bringing just negativity into my life, I started to realize the benefit of removing her completely. In the meantime, Linda's actions began to catch up with her. Those who had previously supported her started to recognize her deceptive methods. Friends and relatives began to criticize her more because they were sick of her being the victim. Before long, her social circle began to dwindle. The family dynamic appeared to shift as a result of the fallout from my predicament. Family members who had previously supported Linda started contacting me to express regret for their responses and to acknowledge her conduct. Some even volunteered to help mend the damaged bonds. Although it didn't happen all at once, it seemed like progress. A few months later, Linda texted me. It had no true responsibility and was brief. She expressed her desire for us to move on from this and stated she was prepared to do so. Although that wasn't the apology I had hoped for, I had already come to the realization that I could move on without her recognition. She had only completed the payments after I threatened more legal action, so I thanked her for doing so and ended the conversation there. I concentrated on repairing the broken treasures when I got home. At last, the old clock that my grandparents had treasured was completely restored and seemed brand new. The mansion and their heritage seemed to come to life at a symbolic moment. With a fresh sense of connection to the house and its past, I hung the clock on the wall and stepped back. After everything that had transpired, there was a noticeable change in the family dynamic. More individuals started to confront Linda since they could no longer put up with her actions. It was obvious that her behavior had repercussions that extended well beyond my circumstances. Confronting her had, in a sense, set off a chain reaction that encouraged others to resist her entitlement. I made the decision to permanently end this chapter. I thanked everyone for their support during the experience in my final Reddit update. The group has been a fantastic resource for guidance, support, and experiences. I shared with them the lessons I had learned about establishing limits and putting my health and tranquility ahead of unhealthy relationships. As I went along, I became certain that my grandparents' house was more than just a location. It served as a reminder of the fortitude and morals they had taught me. It was my home, my haven, and I was going to do all in my power to keep it safe. Update 5. I eventually made the decision to sever all connections after enduring Linda's craziness for months. I didn't announce the choice to forego touch. I just stopped talking to her at all. No more social media conversations or messages. No recognizing her efforts to create a commotion. Without Linda's incessant criticism, my life seemed lighter, almost as if a burden I was unaware I was carrying had been removed. I began to concentrate on the connections that were really important. I became closer to my relatives, particularly those who had been there for me during the struggle. We began getting together more frequently and discussing anything from future goals to family recollections. Now that they had been forged in the furnace of mutual support and struggle, these ties seemed stronger. Of course, Linda did not completely vanish. Her cryptic, passive-aggressive Facebook rants about being deceived by individuals she believed she could trust continued. I didn't participate, but I did hear about it through the grapevine. I had discovered the hard way that answering would just make her more irate. The best course of action was to ignore her, and it was successful. Her posts dwindled in frequency over time, and I eventually stopped hearing about them entirely. After the payments were finally finished, I focused on fixing up the house. Although the renovations had already been completed, I wanted to restore the place's original beauty. I refurbished some of the furniture, painted the trim, and changed the outdated wallpaper. Every renovation honored my grandparents' legacy, while also making the house seem more like mine. In addition, I placed a repaired picture of them in the living room, a subdued yet potent representation of strength and closure. A significant component of this was therapy. The second chapter. It made it clearer to me how much the experience had forced me to change. I wasn't used to setting limits, even if it meant causing disagreement. However, I now saw how important it was. Not only with Linda, but with every aspect of my existence. This increased self-assurance began to manifest in other places. I started speaking up for myself more at work and assuming leadership positions that I had previously avoided. I felt more comfortable speaking up for what I believed in, even in my personal life. Additionally, I discovered opportunities to use my skills to support others by joining a local community organization. I became active in initiatives designed to help those coping with toxic relationships and family disputes. By sharing my experience anonymously, I was able to let people know they weren't alone. Making something positive out of something so unpleasant felt fantastic. I chose to throw a family get-together without Linda, as the house was once again a tranquil retreat. I have never welcomed the extended family into my home since the crisis started. We made fresh, happy experiences together, and everyone who came showed respect for the area. It seemed like a new beginning, and a reminder that, with the correct individuals, family might still provide happiness. In the meantime, Linda's actions began to catch up with her. More and more family members became estranged from her due to her entitlement and deflective behavior. Having grown weary of her incessant drama, relatives who had previously supported her started to distance themselves. By the time it was over, Linda had lost her allies and was alone. It wasn't something I enjoyed doing. It simply seemed to be the inevitable result of what she had done. But Linda's eldest kid continued to communicate. They intentionally broke out from the cycle of entitlement as they developed into a responsible adolescent. They obviously wanted to stay in touch, so we kept things lighthearted with periodic visits and texts. That change gave me hope that the harmful tendencies that had afflicted our family for years may be broken by the following generation. I became aware of how much I had learned from this experience as I gave it some thought. It had not been easy, but I had to stand up for myself. It taught me how crucial it is to keep my peace, even if it means making difficult choices. Linda wasn't the only subject of the teachings. They dealt with relationships, life, and the healthy limits that separate them. Reddit also had a significant impact on this quest. I received a ton of responses from folks sharing their own tales after I published my last update. I received a lot of gratitude for demonstrating to them that it was okay to deal with toxic family members. Some even claimed that my tale inspired them to establish limits that they had been avoiding for years. It was good to know that I had benefited other people. I am now prepared to proceed. I've begun looking forward to the future without Linda's turmoil pulling me down, taking up hobbies I'd ignored, and organizing travels I'd put off for too long. It feels lighter, more liberated, and full of opportunities.